Good morning from Atlantic Council Global Headquarters in Washington. Thank you for those joining us in the United States, the United Kingdom, elsewhere in Europe, and around the globe. It's my honor to welcome you to the 2025 Christopher J. Makins Lecture, the Atlantic Council's tribute to a dear friend of this institution, a dear friend of mine, and many others in the audience, and a tireless advocate for transatlantic relations, and in particular, the U.S.-UK relationship. It's a pleasure to see the Executive Vice Chair of our board, Adrian Arsh, in the audience, also a friend of Lord Mandelson's, and many other Atlantic Council board members, in particular, Wendy Makins. Thank you so much for being here. And Marion, are you here as well? I think Marion will be here, so it's always wonderful to have you here as well. We convene today at a moment of extraordinary uncertainty amid Russia's war in Ukraine, Trump administration efforts to remake its international trade, conflict in the Middle East, tensions with China, and a global contest over the commanding heights of technological change. The United Kingdom has emerged as a key interlocutor with this White House, building on the long-standing special relationship between the United Kingdom and the United States. Recently, the U.S. and UK signed the first trade agreement following President Trump's Liberation Day tariffs that our guest of honor today helped to successfully conclude. London has also struck back-to-back deals on trade with the European Union and with India as well, so it's showing its negotiating acumen and nimbleness. Beyond that, the UK remains a key driver of continuity and resolve on Ukraine, rallying partners around a coalition of the willing to bolster Ukraine's defense, launching new sanctions with Europe on Moscow, even in the absence, for the moment of parallel new U.S. measures, and advancing proposals for an eventual Ukraine peace deal. Lord Peter Mandelson, who joins us today, has been at the center of these efforts. From trade diplomacy to future-looking tech cooperation, he has helped steer the special relationship through a shifting landscape. Ambassador, you said recently, quote, "We have a foundation of a relationship between Britain and the United States in which there's a great deal of trust, a lot of confidence in each other, and a familiarity with how we work." The rest of the quote, "We read the room quite well in Britain, and there's a new room in the United States for us to read, and we've had to adapt to that," end quote. He will join a roster of those who have delivered this lecture that includes Henry Kissinger, Zbigniew Brzezinski, Brent Scowcroft, Lord George Robertson, Sir Malcolm Rifkind, and the Latvian President Vaira Vika-Freiberga. Before turning the floor over, I want to reflect very briefly on the legacy we honor today. Christopher Makins believed deeply in the value of transatlantic unity. He understood that the special relationship was never just bilateral. It was foundational to a stable Europe and a credible transatlantic relationship. We could use his wise voice and his wonderful humor now. We're delighted that his life's work and spirit continue to thrive for this lecture series. And now it's my great honor to welcome Lord Mandelson to the stage, the British Ambassador to the United States, to share his remarks.
Fred, thank you very much indeed for that welcome, and what a very nice room this is to read. Let me start, if I may, on behalf of the United Kingdom and the entire British Embassy. Let me start by expressing our deep condolences for the tragic killing of two young members of staff at the Israeli embassy last week, Yaron Nishinsky and Sarah Milgrim. This is a vile act of anti-Semitism and extremism. It serves as a chilling reminder of the vigilance we must deploy against those who bear evil. It reminds us of the threats facing Israel, but also Jews worldwide. And our thoughts are with the victims, their families, and everyone at the Israeli embassy. So a big thank you to the Atlantic Council and to Fred for the opportunity to deliver this Makins Lecture at this critical moment for the Euro-Atlantic Alliance. And Wendy, it's very nice to see you here. I remember Christopher. I met him in the 1990s. He was a sort of wry, warm individual. His father, great ambassador, Roger Makins, began serving in Washington as British ambassador in the year that I was born. I am indeed older than I look. But 80 years ago this month, the streets of Britain, America, and allied nations erupted in celebration at the fall of fascism in Europe. And for me personally, it's a source of enormous pride that my grandfather, Herbert Morrison, served as Home Secretary in Winston Churchill's wartime coalition. He also served as Deputy Prime Minister in Clement Attlee's transformative post-war government in Britain. That government didn't just support the formation of NATO to counter Soviet expansionism, they were the co-architects of it. Amidst Cold War tensions and economic upheaval, Britain and America advanced from allies to integrated strategic partners at the dawn of the nuclear age, our scientists having joined forces in the Manhattan Project to create the advantage we had at the beginning of this age. It was Western unity which ultimately ended the Cold War peacefully and demonstrated resilience to new threats, including the 9/11 attacks where NATO invoked Article 5 for the first time. Over 8 decades, the foundations of collective defense have remained steadfast, whilst the transatlantic relationship has continuously evolved and adapted to counter new challenges. So today I want to talk about the profound challenge we face in a new age of great power rivalry. A period characterized by political volatility, by economic mercantilism, and geopolitical competition. We are witnessing the end of an era of hyper-globalization, where we assumed that economic integration had made wars almost obsolete. The logic seemed compelling: mutual interests, integrated global supply chains, and shared economic stakes created too much to lose from warfare. History seemed to point only in one direction. And those comfortable assumptions have been shattered. We now see the rise of modern mercantilism, where nations prefer to prioritize national economic strength and autonomy in many respects. States are intervening and playing a more protectionist role in managing trade and directing industrial policy to become ever more self-sufficient and localized. I'm not declaring globalization dead, but it is being radically reconfigured around us. China's export-driven growth strategy flooded the global market with state-subsidized products and undercut Western manufacturing and hollowed out industry. The social disruption, a rapid technological change, where if you take media as an example, we have moved suddenly from decades of information flowing to people through established news organizations to a future where you only see news online that is curated to what you want to know, or what the algorithm and those behind it decides you want to know. And then there's the backlash against globalization's uneven distribution of benefits. You can produce many different numbers to show the widening wealth disparities in the West over the past 30 years, but I would choose a simple one. GDP per capita in the United States has grown about 60 to 70% in real terms. But real median household income growth has been about 20 to 25%. The typical American household has not done as well as the booming US economy would suggest. And a similar story holds true across all our countries in the West. This has posed profound challenges to culture, place, and society, which too many of us over the past decades frankly have ignored. From the American Midwest to the coastal towns of England, a hands-off approach left many places adrift from the success stories of global cities such as London and New York. And in a world which has often felt dominated by the exceptional exponential rise of social media, a sense of grievance and of difference between us and them has been amplified. So yes, I credit President Trump's acute political instincts in identifying the anxieties gripping not only millions of Americans, but also far more pervasive global trends, economic stagnation, a sense of irreversible decline, the lost promise of meaningful work for so many people. These are the giants now that we must confront head on. So where do we go next? It is in no one's interest, certainly not those of close allies, that each country pursues a wholly individualized path, which leads to accelerated economic fragmentation. But if we are serious about rebuilding confidence in the international system, if we wish to maintain a set of common rules and standards, a shared economic and security commons between us, we need to devote an enormous amount of energy and goodwill to preserve, sustain, and deepen the alliances which exist between like-minded countries. For the UK and the rest of Europe, we must reboot the transatlantic alliance. Indeed, boot up the proverbial backside is needed now to deliver peace through strength across three interconnected domains: military, economic, and technological. For my generation, the 20th century gains in peace and prosperity were thought of as a European peace dividend. I now recognize it as an urgent bill, that peace dividend, an urgent bill for decades of defense underinvestment, a payment that is long overdue. We have lived in a fantasy created by the US security guarantee, complacent that a friendly heavyweight across the water would be always there when the going gets tough. Now, we meet in the shadow of Russia's barbaric invasion of Ukraine, now in its fourth year. The UK strongly supports President Trump's initiative to bring this terrible war to an end, and we are working together with partners to secure a just and lasting peace. The Ukraine conflict has served as a brutal wake-up call. State-on-state war has returned to Europe. Adversaries are using nuclear rhetoric to influence decision-making, and we are seeing regular attacks on European infrastructure beneath the threshold of warfare. It is crystal clear that European defence must step up and rebalance for our collective security. Actually, I think President Trump is doing Europe a favour by confronting us with this reality. United States is the UK's closest defence and security ally. We must become less dependent on America while remaining inseparably linked to America, a distinction that I underline of critical importance. Yes, less dependent, but still inseparably linked. Ukraine is just one flashpoint of many amid growing global instability. Even the US does not have limitless resources. This is precisely why Britain must step up in providing for European security, and why we have committed to the biggest sustained increase in defence spending since the Cold War. We will become NATO's fastest innovating nation, ensuring our military forces have the technological and military capabilities to secure long-term strategic advantage, not just spending more, but spending better. Of course, this all needs to be grounded in intelligent and effective strategic choices, not merely increased expenditure. Efficiency and innovation to renew our defence manufacturing bases must drive every pound, every dollar, and every euro that we invest. And we will double down on our alliances. In defence, we will always be NATO first, but not NATO only. And this is particularly true of the UK's focus on the Indo-Pacific, as well as our new security partnership with Europe. One good example is AUKUS, the trilateral security partnership with Australia and America, which will deliver advanced nuclear-powered submarines and catalyze technology sharing on other advanced capabilities. Turning to the theme of economic strength, Britain now enjoys something that has eluded us for far too long: a government with both unity of purpose and longevity. This government's mandate and President Trump's will both last for the next 4 years, providing huge opportunities for collaboration between us. We are both pro-business and pro-trade in Britain, and committed to innovation, not as empty slogans, but as clear, practical imperatives. This UK government has committed to creating the best investment environment with a regulatory reset that makes us the most competitive in Europe. That's our aim. One of the reasons we were able to close the first trade deal of the Trump administration is that our strong economic relationship between our countries is fair, balanced, and reciprocal, but also because, frankly, we are a business-like nation with pragmatic instincts. One of the great backhanded insults in British history was when Napoleon Bonaparte dismissed us as a mere nation of shopkeepers. He was right. Commerce is the lifeblood which flows through our veins, and that is one reason why we British and American cousins remain so close. And that is also one reason why I see the current deal as the beginning of a new chapter, as well as an end, in a sense, in itself. There is scope for an even more transformative stage in our long partnership, and I believe that centres on technology. So let me address technological strength as the third. We face a clear shared threat. There is nothing in this world I fear more than China winning the race for technological dominance in the coming decades. China represents a far more dynamic and formidable strategic rival than the Soviet Union ever was. Economically sophisticated, highly innovative, and strategically patient. The United Kingdom and United States are the only two Western nations with trillion-dollar technology ecosystems, combined with unparalleled talent and research capabilities in our universities and corporations. We must combine forces, in my view, to drive the scientific breakthroughs that will define this century. And AI should be the spear point of that collaboration. Artificial intelligence stands as the next great foundational technology. Through its power, we can rapidly make progress across so many frontiers of science, quantum, synthetic biology, medicine, nuclear fusion. Rather than stifling these transformative technologies through excessive regulation, our two governments must unleash their immense potential for human benefit and Western advantage. Let me say this in conclusion. In his immortal Iron Curtain speech, delivered in Missouri, Churchill spoke eloquently about the primacy of American power and its awesome responsibility to future generations. Today we face our own historical inflection point. No one should doubt that we face accelerating global competition in which it is strongly in our interests to expand the perimeter of our alliances while deepening the transatlantic partnership at its core. So our diplomacy must be more urgent, more agile, and more creative. We must deepen the political and military alliances which defined our past successes, but also create new partnerships born in and of technology which will redefine our future. The stakes could not be higher. The opportunities, actually, could not be greater. And I am confident that our two countries will indeed rise together to meet those challenges. Thank you very much.
Ambassador, thank you so much. That was a thoughtful, meaningful speech that will go down in the history of this lecture as one of its most important, so thank you so much. You've had a list of jobs, senior government positions in the UK government under Prime Minister Tony Blair, Gordon Brown. You've been EU Commissioner for Trade. So you've seen a lot, and you've seen a lot of history, and you're speaking about this again as a historic inflection point. I wonder if you could reflect on that a little bit more. You've got the war in Ukraine, changes in U.S. foreign policy, post-Brexit adjustments. You've seen the UK role evolve over time, particularly as a bridge between the U.S. and Europe. How do you see it now in the sort of broad sweep of history that you've lived through? And we've got some really interesting people in the audience, board members, International Advisory Board members, former Prime Minister in Sweden in the front row, Carl Bildt. I see Ben Wilson from National Grid on our board, Marco Margheri, Alexander Mirchev. So we've got a great group of people all on the edge of their seat.
I think
The job of Britain is to be of huge usefulness both to the United States and the European Union. We're not in the European Union anymore, and we're not going to go back for the foreseeable future, certainly. But we are European. We're a European country. And therefore, it was absolutely right that not only do we begin this new administration here in the United States with an absolute determination to deepen the relationship between our two countries. And I have to say, the UK as a whole, and I personally have received a very warm, honest, engaged welcome from the new administration. I could not complain. And yes, that relationship between us, that particular relationship, I think did give us the first trade deal following Liberation Day, not only because, our trade relationship is already fair and balanced, but because, as you said, I think quoting me, so let me quote you quoting me, that there is a trust.
Yeah.
There is a confidence in the relationship. There is a familiarity between our ways of working. But, and we can build on that. We can take the trade deal that we've done, which saved thousands of jobs in threatened industries in Britain, to a next stage, which is, I hope, to reduce or eliminate tariffs and non-tariff barriers to grow trade between our countries, but also to open the door, as I said, to a technology partnership for the future between our two countries. But I would like to say this too about Britain and Europe. We left the European Union with a pretty miserable deal. Frankly, unfair to us, not particularly favorable in the long term to the EU. It didn't do either of us any favors, and a lot of it was actually left undone. And that's why the Prime Minister and his colleagues in Britain had to embark on this reset between Britain and the European Union in order to improve the miserable deal with which we left the European Union, but also to finish the job and tie up some loose ends, which we've done in trade, energy cooperation, police and border security, and intelligence sharing, and now, of course, in defense. And it's the beginning. It's the foundation of a reset. It's not the end of it. But like the Prime Minister has said, we see absolutely nothing inconsistent with or at odds between our relationship in Europe and our relationship with the US. As I said at the beginning, I think we as a country can serve both America and Europe.
Thank you, Ambassador. We'll take, I'm going to ask a few more questions and then go to the audience for your questions as well. Take us into the negotiations, if you could, a bit, into the Oval Office and how the US and UK arrived at such a deal. And then
a beautiful deal.
A big, beautiful deal. And what are the next steps to expanding it, and how it fits into the Prime Minister's larger foreign policy strategy?
Well, we had to deal with the sectoral tariffs as a priority because they were the ones that presented a particular threat to industry and jobs in Britain. And literally we were facing, unless that deal was done, in the following fortnight, massive loss of jobs in our auto sector, in the West Midlands and elsewhere in Britain, in our steel sector, and potentially, and I'm glad we've got this prospective protection on aerospace and pharmaceuticals as well. And I hope that this deal between Britain and the United States offers a template for other nations, and including the European Union, to do its own deal with the US, because none of us wants to see big trading partners, even giants, sort of going head to head. That's not going to serve anyone's needs or purposes. But can I just say this, that we need the reciprocal tariffs, which are slightly different from the sectoral ones. We need to address those as well, and we're agreed to do so. But the reason why I place so much emphasis on a technology partnership is partly for the reasons I have said. We are in a technology race. That race is dominating foreign policy and geopolitics. And I believe that in this whole sphere and many sectors of science and technology, America's allies can once again demonstrate their relevance and usefulness to the United States. Unless we're able to demonstrate that relevance afresh for a new century, then we're going to lose something that we had in the post-war period when it was so patently obvious that the alliance is not a problem, it's a solution. And the reason it's a solution is partly because what we can do in science and technology, in scientific enterprise and innovation, we can do so much better together as trusted partners and allies than we could do separately and apart. But for this other reason too, our alliance is so relevant, because if you compare the United States and China, which of those two superpowers has the allies? It's America that has the allies. I don't think China has allies. I mean, some it coerces, some through necessity find it necessary to align with China, the North Koreans or the Russians or whatever. But it isn't the trust and love of an alliance of the sort that America has with its allies. And I believe that we can and should embellish, redouble the relevance of America's allies to this great country, so that people are once again renewed and reminded of all the potential that we have to create better together than anything, as I said, we can do apart. I mean, any good marriage occasionally needs to renew its vows, its bonds. And that's what I hope will happen in the coming months and years, starting with the NATO summit in The Hague in the middle of June. As I said, NATO doesn't just need a reset. It doesn't just need a tweak or a rebalance or an adjustment in its cost-bearing burden. It needs a real reinvention for the 21st century. And that's what I hope that the Hague Summit will trigger to open up a lot of collaboration between us in the years to come.
Yeah, in your comments in your lecture, I loved your term becoming less dependent while remaining inseparably linked, which I think is a good way of putting it. The New York Times praised the back-to-back deals with the European Union and the US, but it also, in the following paragraph, raised some questions about your leverage. Quote, "The limited scope and occasionally stingy terms of these deals, both of which required painful concessions, attest to Britain's diminished position in a post-Brexit era. Far from being an agile free agent that's able to strike opportunistic deals, as Brexiteers once predicted, Britain finds itself squeezed between dueling heavyweights." I wonder if you could comment on that, and most particularly, I was in Brussels last week, and the negotiators on the EU side are not any too happy about this 10% baseline tariff, particularly from the UK, which has a trade surplus with the United States.
It's not the first time, by the way. I was reading a great book over the weekend, which I'm only a third of my way into, Ed Luce's book about Brzezinski. And it reminded me that Nixon had done exactly the same in the early 70s. Another 10% baseline tariff put on trade between the United States and its partners. So this is not exactly unique. It's not new. I'm not saying it's welcome. I'm saying it's welcome. But it's not new.
Is that the final, or do you want to improve those terms and perhaps?
Well, let's see. Let's see. I think the president seems quite wedded to that 10% baseline, just as President Nixon was wedded to his 10% baseline. And I'm not sure there have been other presidents who have become equally wedded to baselines of their own. But within that baseline, I think we can and should look where it is on our mutual advantage to reduce not just the effective tariffs that are operating, but also the non-tariff barriers. And I think this is a source of great irritation to the president. We in Europe are only too ready sometimes to say, oh yes, we're free trade, we're open economies, let's bring down tariffs. And then we sort of get in the old non-tariff barriers here, which frustrate trade. I can understand his frustration. I'm a former trade commissioner, as you said, in Europe, and I was my constant pursuit was with trade liberalization. Now, for all the reasons I said, I know that era has moved on, but nonetheless, where it is to our mutual advantage, we should reduce barriers, not grow them, when it comes to trade.
And this charge that you're diminished in your leverage because of your size with the EU and the US, and therefore
doesn't appear to have been the case, does it?
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't noticed any diminution of leverage either here or in Europe. I mean, look, I don't know. It's much easier to write leaders than it is to lead countries and their trade policies, I've noticed.
Thank you for that.
What was it, New York Times?
New York Times.
Great paper.
Yeah.
Great.
The Ukraine. Prime Minister Starmer's positioned the UK as an architect of the so-called coalition, the willing support of Ukraine. Where do you see this going, and how is the UK's role in Ukrainian security evolving? And I guess the most important question to ask, and the Atlantic Council will be in force at the Hague Summit in NATO, is how sustainable and viable is a coalition for security guarantees for ensuring that Ukraine can remain sovereign and secure, integrated, without formal U.S. backing, either a U.S. backstop or a security guarantee of one sort or another?
Well, Ukraine will undoubtedly need security guarantees. We, amongst others in Europe, as well as some outside Europe, are determined to do what we can to train, build up, resupply, re-equip Ukraine's armed forces so that they are in the best possible position to defend and secure themselves against further Russian invasion. And that must be our priority. But of course, as President Trump said, when he was with us in the Oval having lunch during the Prime Minister's visit, you're great soldiers, you're great fighting people. We respect what you do on the battlefield, and we'll always have your back. Always have your back. That's what the President said to our Prime Minister, and I think he's a man of his word. So I'm not going to sort of define or negotiate or whatever. Let's get through these negotiations first and try and bring a lasting, just peace to Ukraine. I think the President got it right over the weekend when he said that Putin's gone crazy. I mean, crazy in his indifference to international opinion, crazy in his disrespect for the President of the United States and what he's trying to do to bring peace, but notably gone crazy in the continuing death and destruction that he is visiting upon Ukraine and its people. This weekend saw the biggest single bombing raid of Ukraine, killing so many Ukrainians sleeping in their beds that we have seen since the invasion by Russia began. is this a man who's looking for peace? It doesn't look like it to me, and I think that President Trump and his colleagues and those on the Hill, the inimitable Senator Graham and his colleagues, they're right now to be looking to the possibility of added pressure on Putin to bring him to the negotiating table. That's our view in Britain. We cannot step back from the challenge that we've taken on, and that is why we are in absolute solidarity with and foursquare behind the Ukrainian people in their fight.
So in that spirit, it sounds to me that you would endorse the Senate package, this new Senate package being put together for sanctions, and in general, a tougher approach of the U.S. toward Ukraine, toward Russia.
Yes, I mean, it's a matter of judgment as to when the time will be right to deploy it.
Let's go back to technology. I think you've touched on something that we probably don't spend enough time on, given its importance right now in relationships everywhere, this race for the commanding heights of technological change. Could you drill deeper?
They are the future industries of tomorrow.
Yep,
I mean,
absolutely.
much rather have our governments sort of devoting themselves to trying to sort of claw back the manufacturing of the past century. Let's focus on the manufacturing and the future industries of tomorrow in this century. That's what we've got to. That's what we've got to laser-like focus on, in my view.
So agree completely. So drill down a little bit. Where do you see the richest areas? Where do you see it already going forward? You talked about AI safety. The UK has been leading in some of the AI conversations there, quantum computing, research collaboration. Talk in just a bit more detail where you see this fleshing out.
AI is the massive key, the accelerator to exploration and discovery and development of science across a whole number of different sectors, whether it be quantum or engineering, biology, or nuclear fusion, or what we do in space and life sciences and medicine. And that's why I want to see our own economy in Britain becoming essentially an AI-driven new model economy for the 21st century. And I believe we have to do that with American technology, capital, and talent to add to our own. And we have all those things in plentiful quantity. And I just feel it so passionately that, you know, if we allow China to win this race, and heaven knows they're catching up with every year that passes, and if China wins that AI race, they will have the key. You know, they will be able to do things which cascade down, not just through their own country, but everyone else's across the world. I don't want to see a world in which, you know, China has got the key to AI, where it's able to use that key to open up so many other areas of technological advance. You know, their values, their principles, how they conduct themselves, you know, is not right for the sort of world that we want to live in and create. So that's why I think that we have to band together, just as we did in the Manhattan Project, which I referred to. I mean, that was an extraordinary collaboration between two great science-rich nations, our own and that of the United States. Well, what goes for the Manhattan Project now needs to go for so many other sectors of technological advance where we can create just huge new humanities and sources of improvement in the lives of our people and of humanity. That's what I want to do. I don't want to create another atomic bomb, by the way. I want to create new things, new sources of enhancing and extending our lives and improving the quality of our lives. And that's what I think technology can do. But we've got to do it by working together.
Thank you, Ambassador. A few questions have come in. I'll also watch for the audience. I see one right there. Let me ask one more question on China, and then we'll go to audience questions. I think we have microphone as well. Great. China. You did talk about China. How has your policy, UK's policy, evolved in the recent years from the golden era UK-China relations under David Cameron to the present day? And we heard China's criticism of the US-UK trade agreement and that it may be designed to exclude Chinese products from British supply chains. It's still a huge market, China. So how do you assess the recent deal's implications for US-China relations? But also, as I said, I was just in Europe. There are a lot of people who feel that the tariff approach of the United States could unwittingly push some of our allies into deeper trading relationships with China, even though they may want to avoid them.
Let's see about that. I think that everyone in Europe is becoming more conscious of the need not to expand or extend our reliance on China. Europe are not, they don't want to shut out China or decouple from China, but we've got to be much more skeptical. We've got to scrutinize much more carefully key areas where we are overly dependent on China in our supply chains. And I think there's been a sort of shift, if you like, in Europe over the last 5-10 years about this. As far as Britain is concerned, we're not going to go back to the golden era of Cameron. We're not going back. We're not going there. But what happened after the golden era is suddenly the next Conservative prime ministers, and there were quite a lot of them following Brexit. I mean, almost at an Italian rate of turnover. I love Italy. We went from the golden era to a sort of Johnson and Truss zigzagging around of our relationship with China. Then we had Rishi Sunak, who adopted a sort of, closed door approach to China. What we are trying to do now, the new Labour government, is essentially to stabilise the relationship so that we're following a clear course, one that is characterised, yes, by competition between ourselves and China, that's obvious, cooperation where needed in meeting global challenges like climate change and others, but also confronting China where necessary. For example, in the support that China is giving to Russia in its continued war against Ukraine. And I think that those are the guiding sort of principles, if you like, that are going to take our policy towards China forward. We are in a new era, everyone realizes that. There is a new dynamic between China and the West. It's not one in which we want to pick needless fights, but nonetheless, where we need to take on aspects of China's behavior and policies, we mustn't be afraid to do so.
Thank you for that. So let me turn to first here in the third row, and then, oh, okay, that's fine. However, we'll go in this order, these three.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm Dan Mullaney. I'm a senior fellow here at Atlantic Council and formerly assistant U.S. Trade Representative for Europe and the Middle East and the chief negotiator for the U.S.-UK FTA negotiation during the first Trump administration. UK was obviously very successful in being first out of the gate in negotiating a deal. I'm curious what advice you might have for other trading partners and maybe notably the EU as to how best to approach these negotiations, and maybe in particular with respect to things like cooperation on China, non-market economy policies and practices, and/or considering things like the 10% tariff to be sort of a red line.
And let me pick up one more question.
Very simply,
Okay, good. What advice?
be respectful, be flexible, be creative, and patient.
I think that's a good answer. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Peter Kirkegaard from the Confederation of Danish Industry. I'll stick to a question on the big, beautiful trade agreement. There's been some criticism that parts of the agreement are non-MFN, specifically the lowering of tariffs on beef and ethanol, and that the UK and US are thereby chiseling away at the sort of WTO rules-based trading system that you helped create. What's your response to that? Thank you.
Well, I wish the international trading system in its rule book was in better health than it is at the moment. I'm a supporter of the WTO. I think that having international trade rules is something that helps us in the advanced economies. I don't think that abandoning rules and just allowing anyone to do anything and to take any action, without any recourse whatsoever, is going to serve our purposes and needs amongst the advanced economies, the liberal democracies, in any way at all. So I think we need to safeguard rules, but I also think we have to modernize the WTO's rule book. I'm not sidestepping your question, or put it a different way, I was, but I don't mean, look, when the deal is complete, when it's progressed through further stages, then I think you'll see it compliant. But I think that much more important point is what do we do about the future of the WTO? And the reason why the WTO's rule book and its scope is so frustrating for us, for example, vis-a-vis China and the export-driven model that it's operating in, which it sort of produces fit to burst in the simple expectation that the rest of the world will simply suck up its surplus capacity, whatever the consequences for our own industry and our own employment. Now, the reason for the frustration in that is, quite honestly, because the WTO rulebook is not fit for purpose in the 21st century. The WTO rulebook was designed to cater for essentially market-based economies rather than state-backed economies. There was an assumption towards the end of the last century that all of us were or were en route to becoming, similar market-based economies. That has proven not to be the case. And the rulebook simply doesn't cater for different sorts of economies, certainly one as large as China's. Therefore, we've got not to abandon the WTO and its rulebook, but to modernize and improve that rulebook and make the WTO more effective.
Thank you, Ambassador. Please. And then after here to Fran Burwell in the front. Please.
Thank you so much, Lord Mandelson. Dr. Myrtle Alexander, Institute for Academic Management. As someone who stems from the West Midlands, thank you for the mention. My question is regards to your 3 points that you highlighted, being military, economics, and technology. I'd like to add a fourth, which would be education, which is the fundamental foundation for those three. Where do you see education as it pertains to academics and apprenticeships going forward?
Hugely important, because if we're not going to see large numbers of our fellow citizens falling by the wayside as this technological revolution gathers pace, we're going to have to re-educate, re-skill, and make sure that the education we provide for people is also fit for the 21st century. That's why I want to see investment in education, including universities. I know it's said, and there's a kernel of truth in this, that universities in some respects have sort of lost their way a bit, that that they lost a sort of grip of something or other, I don't know, common sense of proportion about some of the behavior that was going on in universities. I'm not a fan of cancel culture. I'm afraid I think it breeds terrible intolerance. So yes, universities, reform thyself should be our maxim, but we need universities. The great power and scale of the United States that's been built since the Second World War has been on the back of massive investment in science. Massive investment in science since the Second World War. You know, America certainly shouldn't be throwing that away, but perhaps some of the universities need a little bit of a course correction.
So we've got a lot of online questions. Let me pick up two. So one online and then to Fran Burwell. The one online from Sylvain Gaillot is, to what extent can Britain play a part in the current U.S.-Iran negotiations? So let me pick up that, and then also if we could pass a microphone to Fran.
Fran Burwell, Europe Center here at the Atlantic Council and McClarty Associates. I'd like to ask you about the intersection between UK-US and UK-EU. You mentioned being pro-business, regulatory reset, stressed the importance of non-tariff barriers. But in your agreement with the EU, the UK has opted for dynamic alignment, at least on agricultural issues in certain sectors. You, as a former trade commissioner, know what that means. But also, in the defense realm, you're now starting negotiations on a defense pact with the EU of some sort. What needs to happen on that in order for you to have access to the SAFE program of the EU and the finances involved?
Just on the trade and dynamic alignment, there's no point in disaligning ourselves from European Union rules and standards, where we are operating in Britain those rules and standards in order to export into the European single market. I mean, why make a fetish of disalignment when we know that it's in the interests of our business and traders to pursue and to follow those rules and standards? So there are a whole number of areas in what you might loosely call the sort of old economy or traditional economy. Many sectors where many businesses in Britain are Europe-facing, and it would be absurd either to cut yourself off from that market by sort of adopting different standards and rules for the sake of it when there's no useful purpose served by that. When you can maximize your trading opportunities by remaining in alignment, you know, where it suits your interests. But there are other areas, perhaps new economy areas of new technology and whatever, where, frankly, and I do feel this, Britain's got to see where it can and should follow a more independent regulatory pathway. Europe's got himself, and I say this as a who knows all this sort of inside out. The European Union has got itself into a tangle over much of the regulation that it's pumped through over the last 5+ years. And commissioners know this. You know, GDPR hasn't worked out quite as people foresaw. Mario Draghi said that the GDPR is killing European business. Well, we can't stand by and let that continue indefinitely. Now I'm told that the AI law, you know, is not serving the needs of AI in Europe. There are other sort of great compliance sort of new rules that are coming in the next sort of 2 years, which frankly are just going to load down European business, you know, with more burden, more costs, more people operating, more compliance. Heaven knows Europe has got to wake up to the need for greater competitiveness. And I hope that not only are we going in Europe to listen to what the president is saying about defence and the need for defence spending, but if we're going to be economically successful, we've also got to listen to what people are saying about regulation and competitiveness and where we place our investments, including, by the way, in education and skills, but in digitalizing our economy, in undergoing the energy transition that's going to bring benefits for us as well, and in other areas too. All these and others are massive wake-up calls for the European Union. Did you want to, just on Iran?
Yes, let's do Iran and then...
On Iran, very simply this. Iran, since the theocratic revolution took place, has never been in a weaker state than it is now. Weakened, yes, by economic sanctions, weakened by the heavy pounding that its proxies have taken, weaker because of the growth of public opinion, especially amongst young people in Iran, away from the regime. Iran is vulnerable.
Its air defenses are down, and it's shown it cannot really effectively strike Israel either at the same time. Yep.
But it still retains enrichment facilities which can produce, for military purposes, a nuclear bomb. And we can't accept that. And so we, in Britain, strongly support the President's initiative in negotiating away these enrichment and related facilities in Iran. We support what Steve Witkoff has been doing in his negotiations, which are making some progress. Whether they will finally bring the Iranian regime to their senses and realize that they've got to find a way out of this or face a worse alternative, I don't know. It remains to be seen. But we also have the snapback facility available to us in Europe, the E3, Britain, France, Germany working very actively alongside the United States on this. The clock is ticking on snapback, which could produce a snapback to the original sanctions against Iran. They need to be mindful of that as well.
Thank you. So, Ambassador Mandelson, first of all, thank you to Wendy Makins. It's just wonderful that we're able to continue to salute Christopher and his legacy here at the Atlantic Council and beyond. Thank you to Lord Mandelson, British Ambassador to the United States. Thank you to all your questions. We didn't get to even a fraction of them in the audience and online, but we've run out of time. It's wonderful to have you in town with your important voice, Lord Mandelson.
Well, it's very nice to be living in the United States.